The rain in Oakhaven didn't just fall, it loitered. It was the sort of drizzle that clung to your eyelashes and made the pavement look like a bruised mirror, reflecting the grey-bellied clouds that had called this corner of Gloucestershire home for as long as I could remember. I was sitting on a damp bench outside the rusty teapot, nursing a lukewarm Earl Grey and wondering why life felt like a jigsaw puzzle where the last piece had been chewed by the dog. You see, there is a very specific type of debt that isn't measured in pounds and pence. It's a debt of the soul. They say youth is a gift, but if you ask me, youth is more like a dodgy landlord who keeps your deposit and forgets to fix the heating. And what I am owed, what I am still waiting for the universe to cough up, is a confession. Not a grand, cinematic declaration on a rain-slicked balcony, but just a simple, honest string of words that should have been spoken when my hair was thicker and my knees didn't click when I stood up. Her name was Elara Vance. Even now, saying it feels like biting into a lemon, sharp, refreshing, and enough to make your eyes water. Elara was the kind of girl who carried a sketchbook everywhere and had a permanent smudge of charcoal on her left cheekbone. She moved through the corridors of our sixth form college like she was listening to a melody that no one else could hear. I, on the other hand, was Barnaby Finch, a boy whose primary talent was tripping over flat surfaces and accidentally deleting my own homework. I remember one Tuesday in November. The sky was the color of wet cardboard. We were in the library, supposedly studying for our A-level history exam, but mostly we were just breathing the same dusty air. I was staring at a map of the Treaty of Versailles, but all I could actually see was the way Elara tucked a stray lock of mahogany hair behind her ear. "Barnaby," she whispered, her voice like a secret being shared. My heart did a frantic little tap dance against my ribs. Yes. Do you ever think that triangles are the most tragic of all shapes? I blinked. This was the pseudo-philosophy I loved about her. It made absolutely no sense, yet it felt like the most profound thing I'd ever heard. "Because they're pointy," I suggested, trying to look deep. "No," she sighed, leaning closer. I could smell peppermint and old paper. "Because a triangle is always trying to be a circle, but it's too busy being sharp. It's a shape that wants to hold everything inside but keeps poking holes in itself." I nodded solemnly, as if I understood exactly what she meant. Right. Tragic. Definitely. I feel like a bit of an isosceles myself today. She laughed then, a bright, bubbly sound that made the librarian hiss at us. That laugh was my favorite song. In that moment, the words were right there, perched on the tip of my tongue like a skydiver waiting for the signal. "Elara, I think you're the most incredible person I've ever met. I think about you when I'm eating toast. I think about you when I'm brushing my teeth. I think I'm quite desperately in love with you. But instead," I said, "do you want to share my packet of salt and vinegar hula hoops?" She smiled, took a hoop, and slid it onto her ring finger. "I do," she joked. And that was it. My big moment, swallowed by a potato snack. Youth is a strange beast. We spend so much time waiting for the right moment that we fail to realize the moments are just passing us by like commuters on a fast train. We think we have an infinite supply of tomorrows, but really, we're just working with a handful of nows. There was the time we went to the summer fair on the village green. The air was thick with the scent of candyfloss and diesel from the spinning rides. We had spent the afternoon losing money on the coconut shy and getting dizzy on the waltzers. As the sun began to dip behind the Malvern Hills, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and burnt orange, we sat on the grass, sharing a bag of greasy chips. "Barnaby," she said, looking out at the horizon. "What do you want to be when you're not a teenager anymore?" I looked at her profile, the way the fading light caught the bridge of her nose. I wanted to say, "Yours. I want to be yours." "I don't know," I mumbled, picking a burnt chip out of the bag. "Maybe a park ranger? Or someone who tests mattresses for a living. Something where I don't have to talk to a lot of people." "You're good at talking," she said, turning to me. Her eyes were wide and dark. "You just don't say the things you're actually thinking." The air went still. It was one of those pauses that feels heavy, like a lungful of water. I looked at her lips, then her eyes, then back to her lips. This was it. The universe was practically screaming at me. Tell her. Just say the word. "I think." I started, my voice cracking like a dry twig. Yes, she encouraged, leaning in so close I could see the tiny gold flecks in her irises. I think I've got a bit of ketchup on my chin, I finished, frantically wiping my face with a napkin. She laughed, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, disappointment. Or maybe just the realization that I was a complete and utter cabbage. You're a riot, Barnaby Finch, she said, standing up and brushing the grass from her skirt. The thing about being young and slightly stupid is that you don't realize you're being stupid until you're old and it's too late to do anything about it. I spent years in that state of almost. We were the best of friends, the kind who had our own language of inside jokes and meaningful glances. We knew each other's coffee orders and the names of each other's childhood pets. But we never crossed that invisible line. I told myself I was being noble. I was protecting our friendship. I didn't want to make things weird. But really, I was just terrified. Love is a terrifying thing because it gives someone else the power to break you into 1,000 tiny pieces, and I wasn't sure I had enough glue to put myself back together again. Then came the end of the summer before university. Elara was going to Edinburgh to study fine art, and I was staying in the south to study geography, mostly because I liked maps and they didn't require much emotional vulnerability. The night before she left, we went for a walk along the canal. The water was black and still, reflecting the streetlights like fallen stars. We walked in silence for a long time, our shoulders occasionally brushing. Every time they did, it felt like a small electric shock. I'm going to miss this, she said softly, stopping by the old lock. The canal? I asked, being purposefully obtuse because the alternative was crying. No, Barnaby. You. I'm going to miss you. I felt a lump the size of a cricket ball form in my throat. I'll miss you too. I'll send you postcards. Really boring ones of local landmarks. She turned to face me, taking both of my hands in hers. Her palms were warm. Barnaby, is there anything you want to tell me before I go? Anything at all? This was the final hurdle. The last lap. The ultimate speak now or forever hold your peace moment. I could feel the words bubbling up, a tidal wave of confession. I love you. Don't go. Or go, but take me with you. Or just know that my heart belongs to you and it's going to be very lonely without its owner. I opened my mouth. I took a breath. Don't forget to pack a warm coat, I said. Edinburgh is very windy. Elara stared at me for a long beat. Then, she stood on her tiptoes and kissed me on the cheek. It was a soft, lingering kiss that smelled of vanilla. You're a wonderful idiot, she whispered. And then she walked away. 10 years. That was a decade ago. I did become a geographer, of sorts. I work for the local council now, mapping flood risks and trying to convince people that building houses on marshes is a bad idea. I'm still slightly clumsy, I still overthink everything, and I still haven't found a way to tell Elara Vance how I feel. We lost touch, as people do. Life gets in the way. Careers, new cities, new people. I heard through the grapevine that she spent some time in Paris, that she had an exhibition in London, that she was happy. I was happy for her, truly. But there was always that nagging feeling in the back of my mind, that sense of an unfinished sentence. And then, 3 days ago, I received an invitation. It was a small, cream-colored card. Elara Vance invites you to the opening of the Unspoken Geometry, an exhibition of new works. Saturday, 7 p.m. The Oakhaven Gallery. I spent 3 days panicking. I tried on every shirt I owned. I practiced my casual yet sophisticated face in the mirror. I wondered if I should bring flowers, or if that was too much. In the end, I brought nothing but my own pounding heart. The gallery was bright and minimalist, filled with people in black turtlenecks drinking Prosecco. I felt like a potato in a room full of pearls. I wandered through the rooms, looking at the paintings. They were beautiful abstract splashes of color, sharp lines, and soft, blurred edges. And then I saw it. In the final room, there was a large canvas. It wasn't like the others. It was a painting of a rainy canal at night. 2 figures stood by a lock, their silhouettes blurred and indistinct. But it was the title that made my breath catch in my throat. The boy who promised a warm coat. I stood there, frozen, as the world around me seemed to fade into a blur. It took me a long time to paint that one, a voice said from behind me. I turned around. It was her. She looked different, her hair was shorter, her style more refined, but she still had that same spark in her eyes, that same smudge of charcoal, or maybe it was eyeliner now, on her cheekbone. Elara, I breathed. Barnaby Finch, she said, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. You came. I like the painting, I said, my usual eloquence deserting me. The lighting is very accurate. For Gloucestershire. She laughed, and it was the same song, the same bright melody that had lived in my head for a decade. Is that all you have to say, Barnaby? After all this time? I looked at the painting, then back at her. I thought about the hula hoops, the summer fair, the canal, and the 10 years of silence that followed. I thought about the debt of youth, the confession that was owed. I realized then that youth doesn't owe us a confession. We owe it to ourselves. We spend so much time waiting for life to give us permission to be brave, but life is just waiting for us to stop being afraid. It's okay to be a bit of a tragedy. It's okay to be a triangle trying to be a circle. It's even okay to be a wonderful idiot who worries about warm coats. No, I said, and for once, my voice didn't crack. That's not all I have to say. I took a step closer. The smell of peppermint was gone, replaced by something more mature, sandalwood and expensive paint, but the feeling was exactly the same. Elara, I said, I think triangles are tragic too. But I think they're also the strongest shape in engineering. They hold things up when everything else wants to fall down. She arched an eyebrow. Is this more pseudo-philosophy, Barnaby? Maybe, I smiled. But what I'm trying to say is, I've loved you since we were 17. I loved you through the geography degree, through the flood maps, and through every rainy day in this town. I was too scared to say it then because I didn't want to lose you. But I realized that I lost you anyway because I never truly showed you who I was. The gallery seemed to go silent. Elara stared at me, her eyes searching mine. For a moment, I thought I'd waited too long. I thought the debt had been written off, the account closed. Then, she reached out and took my hand. Her palm was still warm. You took your time, didn't you? She whispered. I'm a geographer, I said, feeling a tear prick at the corner of my eye. We move at the speed of tectonic plates. She laughed, a watery, beautiful sound, and pulled me toward her. Well, she said, luckily for you, I've always been very patient with slow-moving landmasses. As we stood there in the middle of the gallery, surrounded by art and people and the echoes of our younger selves, I realized that the confession hadn't been lost. It had just been waiting for the right version of us to be ready to hear it. Youth didn't owe me anything. It had given me everything I needed, the memories, the mistakes, and the long, winding road that led me back to this room. We walked out of the gallery and into the Oakhaven night. It was raining, of course. A soft, persistent drizzle that made the streetlights glow. Barnaby, Elara said, as we stood under her umbrella. Yes. I don't have a warm coat. It's back at the hotel. I smiled, wrapped my arm around her shoulder, and pulled her close. That's all right, I said. I think I can help with that. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a tragedy. I felt like a circle, complete, unbroken, and exactly where I was supposed to be. Life might be a bit of a mess, and we might be a bit late to the party, but as long as we're honest with the people we love, the universe has a funny way of making sure the books are balanced in the end. I looked up at the grey sky and whispered a silent thank you to the rainy town of Oakhaven. It took 10 years, a lot of missed opportunities, and a very specific painting, but the debt was finally paid in full. And it was worth every single penny. The morning after the gallery opening didn't feel like a cinematic montage. There were no soaring violins, and the sun didn't burst through the clouds with any particular sense of triumph. In fact, it was a very standard Tuesday in Oakhaven. The sky was the color of a well-used dishcloth, and the local magpies were having a heated debate over a discarded crisp packet outside my window. But as I sat in the kitchen of my small flat, staring at a box of Earl Grey tea, I felt as though my internal compass had finally stopped spinning and was pointing firmly north. Or perhaps north-northwest, towards the Royal George Hotel where Elara was staying. I had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had dreamt the whole thing. Perhaps I was still 17, asleep in my parents' spare room, and the last 10 years of flood maps and sensible shoes had been a very long, very dull fever dream. But my hand still felt warm where she had held it, and my coat, my very sensible, waterproof, fleece-lined coat, was still damp from the Oakhaven rain. I decided that the most philosophical thing to do in this situation was to make toast. Toast is the ultimate foundation of human existence. It is bread that has gone through a trial by fire and come out crispier, more resilient, and better suited for butter. I felt a bit like toast this morning. Slightly singed by a decade of longing, but definitely more structurally sound. I met Elara at a small cafe called the Crumbly Anchor. It was the sort of place that smelled of damp dogs and expensive cinnamon, where the tables wobbled just enough to make you feel like you were at sea. She was already there, tucked into a corner booth, wearing a jumper the color of a bruised plum and reading a book about Renaissance pigments. "You're late, Barnaby," she said, not looking up. "The tectonic plates must be having a coffee break." "I encountered a very stubborn swan by the canal," I lied, sliding into the seat opposite her. It had opinions about my choice of scarf. It was a very territorial encounter. She looked up then, and the smile she gave me made my heart do a little somersault, a very clumsy, uncoordinated somersault, like a baby panda falling off a log. "I missed your lies. They're always so unnecessarily detailed." "They aren't lies," I insisted, though my ears were turning pink. "They're narrative enhancements. Life is often quite flat, Elara. It needs a bit of texture. Like a good topographical map." We ordered 2 fry-ups. There is something deeply intimate about eating a full English breakfast with someone you haven't seen in 10 years. It's a vulnerable act. You have to navigate the structural integrity of a fried egg and the moral complexity of black pudding while trying to look like a functioning adult. "So," she said, prodding a mushroom with her fork. "London is loud. It's fast. Everyone walks as if they're trying to win a race against their own shadows. And then there's Oakhaven, where even the shadows seem to be having a nap." "It's the humidity," I explained. "It makes everything sluggish. Even the existential dread takes its time getting around here." "I think I like it," she whispered. "I forgot how quiet the air is. In London, the air is full of other people's deadlines. Here, it just smells like moss. And old stone. And wet wool," I added. "Don't forget the wet wool. It's the official scent of Gloucestershire." We spent the afternoon walking through the woods behind the old manor house. This was where we used to hide when we were teenagers, pretending we were explorers discovering a lost civilization instead of just 2 kids avoiding their homework. The trees were older now, their bark gnarled and covered in lichen, looking like grumpy old men frozen in mid-sentence. "Do you ever feel like we're just echoes?" I asked, stopping by a stream that was babbling nonsense to some pebbles. "Like the 17-year-old versions of us are still here, hiding behind that oak tree, laughing at how old and sensible we've become?" Elara leaned against a fence, her breath misting in the cool air. "I think the 17-year-old me would be disappointed I'm not wearing more glitter. But she'd be glad I finally found someone who understands the tragedy of triangles." "I've been thinking about that," I said, adjusting my glasses. "If we're triangles, and we're trying to be circles, maybe we've been looking at it all wrong. Maybe a relationship isn't about becoming a circle. Maybe it's about 2 triangles leaning against each other to form a square. Or a diamond. Diamonds are very hard to break. They're basically just carbon that's been under a lot of pressure for a long time. Like us." Elara stared at me for a long beat. "Barnaby, that is simultaneously the most ridiculous and the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. You really are a wonderful idiot." "I try," I said, feeling quite pleased with myself. "I've had 10 years to practice being an idiot. I've reached a professional level." We reached the old stone bridge, the one where the graffiti from 2012 was still faintly visible under a layer of ivy. We stood there for a while, watching the water swirl. It felt as though the gap between us, that 10-year canyon filled with silence and missed birthdays, was finally being bridged. Not by anything grand, but by the simple, quiet act of being present. "I have to go back to London on Friday," she said suddenly. The water seemed to turn colder. "I have a show to finish. Commissions. A life that exists in a different postcode." I felt a familiar pang of anxiety. My inner geographer immediately started calculating distances, train times, and the probability of long-distance relationships surviving the British rail network. "London isn't that far," I said, though it felt like the moon. "It's only 2 hours on the Great Western. If the signals are working. Which they usually aren't. But I have a very reliable car. It's a Volvo. It's built like a tank and has excellent lumbar support." Elara laughed, reaching out to tuck a stray hair behind my ear. Her touch was light, but it grounded me more than any map ever could. "Barnaby, stop calculating the logistics of the universe for 5 minutes." "I can't help it," I muttered. "I'm a man of maps. I need to know where the boundaries are." "The boundaries are wherever we decide they are," she said softly. "I don't want to lose you again. Not because I didn't say something, and certainly not because of the M4 motorway." I looked at her, and in that moment, I realized that being a circle wasn't about being perfect or complete on my own. It was about this shared space between two people who were both a bit broken, a bit weird, and entirely too fond of pseudo-philosophy. "I'll come to London," I said, my voice steady. "I'll bring my warm coat. And I'll learn to navigate the underground, even though it's a topographical nightmare. I'll do it because the air might be full of deadlines there, but I suspect it'll taste better if you're in it." She smiled, a real, brilliant smile that reached her eyes. "You'd hate London, Barnaby. There are no flood maps for the Piccadilly line." "I'll make some," I vowed. "I'll be the only man in London who knows exactly where the puddles are going to form. It'll be my superpower." As the sun began to set, casting long, purple shadows across the Gloucestershire hills, we started the walk back to the town. I realized then that youth hadn't just owed me a confession, it had been a long, slow tutorial in how to be brave. It takes a long time to learn that the things we're most afraid of saying are usually the only things worth saying at all. We passed a small grocery shop, and on a whim, I ducked inside and bought a packet of Hula Hoops. Beef flavor. When I came back out, I handed them to her. "For the road," I said. She took the packet, her eyes shimmering. "Are you going to ask for a ring this time?" "No," I said, taking her hand and interlacing our fingers. "I think I've graduated from potato-based jewelry. I'm looking for something a bit more permanent. Like a tectonic shift." She leaned her head on my shoulder as we walked, the plastic packet crinkling between us. The rain started again, a soft, gentle Oakhaven drizzle that felt like a blessing rather than a nuisance. I wasn't a tragedy anymore. I wasn't a lonely triangle or a confused geographer lost in his own charts. I was just Barnaby Finch, walking through the rain with the girl who painted the light, finally understanding that the best maps are the ones you draw together, one puddly step at a time. And as we reached the lights of the town, I knew that whatever happened next, London, Oakhaven, or some strange place in between, would be all right. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about the weather. I had everything I needed right here, under the shelter of a shared umbrella and a decade of late, but perfectly timed, honesty. The rain in Oakhaven doesn't just fall, it negotiates. It whispers against the golden Cotswold stone, asking permission to turn the dust into a fine, fragrant mist that smells of wet earth and ancient secrets. As we walked, the silence between us wasn't the heavy, suffocating kind that had defined the last decade. It was light. It was the kind of silence you find at the end of a long, complicated book when you're finally ready to turn the last page and see what the author has planned for the sequel. I held her hand, and for a geographer, this was a significant topographical development. My palm was slightly sweaty, which I tried to rationalize as a localized humidity event, but Elara just squeezed back, her fingers interlocking with mine as if they had been designed by a master architect specifically for this purpose. "You're thinking about the Volvo again, aren't you?" she asked, her voice dancing through the drizzle. I was actually thinking about the structural integrity of a hula hoop, I replied, holding up the beef-flavored hoop I had just excavated from the packet. It's a marvel of snack engineering. A perfect circle of potato-based joy. It's also a metaphor for our lives, if you think about it. Hollow in the middle until you put a finger through it and claim it as your own. Elara stopped in the middle of the pavement, right outside Mrs. Gable's antique shop, which was currently displaying a rather moth-eaten taxidermy fox. Barnaby Finch, that is the most ridiculous, pseudo-philosophical thing you have ever said. And I've heard you explain why clouds are just the sky's way of having a midlife crisis. They are, I insisted, feeling that familiar, bubbly warmth in my chest. Think about it. They wander around, change shapes, get all dark and moody, and then they just let it all out. It's very cathartic. I think I'm currently in my cirrus phase. High altitude, wispy, and generally optimistic about the prevailing winds. She laughed, a sound like silver coins falling onto velvet. She took the hula hoop from my hand and ate it. Well, your cirrus phase is very charming. But we need to talk about the London of it all. You said you'd come. Did you mean it, or was that just the adrenaline of the bridge talking? I looked at her, and the silliness drained away, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt since I was 17 and first realized that the North Star was a very reliable friend. I meant it. I've spent 10 years mapping things that stay still. Mountains. Rivers. Postcode boundaries. I think it's time I tried mapping something that moves. Even if it moves at 70 miles per hour on the M4. We continued walking, the lights of the high street beginning to flicker on. Oakhaven at dusk is like a painting that hasn't quite dried yet. The oranges and yellows of the shop windows bleed into the blue-grey of the twilight, creating a smudge of comfort that makes you want to buy a very expensive scarf and drink cocoa until your teeth ache. I have a flat in Hackney, Elara said, her tone shifting to something more grounded. It's small. It smells like linseed oil and burnt toast because I'm terrible at using the grill. There's a park nearby where the squirrels are incredibly aggressive, and the neighbors play jazz at 3 in the morning. It's not Oakhaven. There's no moss. There's just life. Fast, messy, loud life. I like jazz, I lied. Well, I like the idea of jazz. It's like geography without the grid lines. Very improvisational. And I'm excellent with aggressive squirrels. I have a very stern geographer's stare that I use on unruly terrain. I'm sure it works on rodents too. You're a terrible liar, Barnaby, she teased, but she leaned her head against my arm as we walked. But you're a very brave one. We reached the gate of her aunt's cottage, the place she had been staying for the week. The roses were dripping with rain, bowing their heads as if in prayer. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of reality. The Friday she had mentioned felt like a physical cliff edge. In my mind, I was already drawing the contour lines of the days remaining. Wednesday, hope. Thursday, anticipation mixed with mild dread. Friday, the great departure. Come in for a cup of tea? She asked. My aunt is at her bridge club, so the kitchen is officially a neutral zone. No one will ask us why we're damp or why we're holding a half-empty packet of hula hoops like it's a sacred relic. Tea would be statistically optimal, I said, feeling my heart do a little somersault. Inside, the cottage smelled of lavender and old paper. It was the kind of house where every surface was covered in lace doilies, and the clocks all seemed to be ticking at slightly different speeds, creating a rhythmic chaos that was strangely soothing. Elara moved through the kitchen with the grace of someone who didn't need a map to find the kettle. I sat at the small wooden table, watching her. I realized then that this was the missing piece I'd been trying to find in my charts and surveys. It wasn't a location. It wasn't a coordinate. It was a person. A person who made the act of boiling water look like a masterpiece in progress. Do you ever feel like we're just 2 points on a graph that finally decided to intersect? I asked, tracing the grain of the wood with my thumb. Elara turned, leaning against the counter as the kettle began to hiss. I think we're more like 2 different maps of the same territory, Barnaby. You see the heights and the distances. I see the colors and the light. Neither of us was wrong. We were just looking at different layers. That's very profound, I said, nodding solemnly. I might have to write that down. Or at least put it in a footnote in my next report on soil erosion. Don't you dare, she laughed, bringing two mismatched mugs to the table. One had a picture of a very grumpy cat on it, the other said world's best knitter. She gave me the cat. We sat there in the soft glow of the kitchen light, the rain drumming a steady beat on the roof. It was a moment of profound ordinariness, and yet, it felt monumental. Like a tectonic plate finally sliding into place after centuries of friction. I used to write you letters, she said suddenly, looking down at her tea. After I moved away, I never sent them. They're in a box under my bed in London. They're full of all the things I was too scared to say because I thought you'd forgotten me. Or worse, that you'd moved on and become someone who didn't care about the difference between a hill and a plateau. I felt a lump in my throat. I never moved on, Elara. I just stayed still. I thought if I stayed exactly where you left me, you'd know where to find me if you ever looked back. It wasn't a very proactive strategy, I admit. It's basically the emotional equivalent of being a landmark. Well, she said, reaching across the table to cover my hand with hers. I looked back. And I'm very glad the landmark is still standing. Even if it is a bit obsessed with Volvos and lumber support. It's excellent support, Elara. Truly. You could drive to the Arctic Circle in that car and your lower back would feel like it was resting on a cloud. She giggled, her eyes bright with a mixture of tears and mischief. I'll take your word for it. But for now, let's just worry about the drive to London. And maybe, just maybe, we can figure out how to be 2 points that don't just intersect, but stay together. Like a very long, very complicated line. A polyline, I suggested. In mapping terms, it's a series of connected segments. It can go anywhere. It can curve, it can turn corners, it can even go in circles if it wants to. But it's always one continuous thing. A polyline, she repeated, tasting the word. I like that. It sounds like something we can work with. As I walked home that night, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the world sparkling under the streetlights. I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't just a geographer anymore, I was an explorer. I had a destination. I had a map that was being drawn in real time, filled with jazz, aggressive squirrels, and a girl who saw the world in colors I was only just beginning to understand. Youth might have owed me a confession, but the present had given me something much better, a second chance. And as I looked up at the clearing sky, I realized that the best thing about being a circle isn't that you're complete. It's that you have no beginning and no end. You just keep going, around and around, until you find the person who wants to walk the path with you. I reached my front door, fumbled for my keys, and looked at the old Volvo parked in the driveway. It looked sturdy. It looked reliable. It looked like it was ready for a trip to Hackney. Get ready, old girl, I whispered to the car. We've got some jazz to listen to. The next morning, the sun broke over Oakhaven with a peculiar, buttery intensity. It was the kind of morning that demanded action, or at the very least, a very thorough breakfast. I found myself in the kitchen, attempting to make poached eggs, a culinary feat that usually ended in something resembling a maritime disaster. But today, I didn't care if the yolks broke. I didn't care if the toast was slightly charred. I was busy thinking about the logistics of moving a life. Not a physical move, I wasn't ready to pack up my collection of antique compasses just yet, but an emotional relocation. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Elara. The squirrels are already calling me. They know I'm coming back. Send help. Or nuts. I smiled, typing back, I'm researching squirrel repellent frequencies as we speak. Also, I've checked the traffic reports for Friday. If we leave at 10 a.m., we'll hit the sweet spot between the school run and the lunchtime rush. It's a tactical masterpiece. Her reply was almost instant. You are such a nerd. See you at 11? I want to show you the old oak tree in the park before I go. The one where we carved our initials. I want to see if they're still there. My heart did that strange, fluttery thing again. The oak tree. I hadn't been there in years. It was tucked away in a corner of the local park, a place we used to go when we wanted to escape the world and pretend we were the only two people on the map. I spent the next hour preparing. I packed a small bag, just in case. I checked the tire pressure on the Volvo. It was perfect, obviously. I even polished my favorite brass compass, though I knew exactly where I was going. When I met her at the park, the grass was still damp, and the air was filled with the scent of mown lawns and possibility. Elara was wearing a yellow raincoat that made her look like a stray sunbeam. She looked nervous, her eyes searching mine for a sign that I hadn't changed my mind overnight. "The tree is this way," she said, pointing towards a dense thicket of trees at the edge of the playing fields. We walked in silence for a while, the only sound the crunch of twigs beneath our boots. The park felt smaller than it did when we were kids, the distances shorter, the hills less daunting. It's funny how perspective shifts when you grow up. The world doesn't shrink, you just get bigger. We found the tree. It was a massive, gnarled thing, its branches reaching out like the arms of a weary giant. We circled the trunk, our eyes scanning the rough bark for any sign of our younger selves. "There!" Elara cried, pointing to a spot about 5 feet up. It was faint, nearly swallowed by a decade of growth, but it was there. B+E enclosed in a heart that was now more of an irregular polygon, but the sentiment remained. It was a topographical record of a moment when two people thought they would last forever. "We were so small," I whispered, reaching out to touch the scarred wood. "We were so sure," she countered, her voice soft. "I remember when you carved that. You were so worried about the symmetry. You kept measuring the distance between the letters with a ruler you'd stolen from the maths lab. I wanted it to be accurate," I defended myself. "Accuracy is important in matters of the heart. If you're going to make a permanent mark on a living organism, you should at least ensure it's aesthetically pleasing." Elara laughed, leaning her shoulder against mine. "You haven't changed at all, Barnaby. You're still trying to measure things that can't be measured." "I'm learning," I said, turning to face her. "I'm learning that some things are better left unmeasured. Like how much I missed you. Or how much I'm looking forward to Friday." She looked up at me, her face framed by the yellow hood of her coat. For a moment, the years between us seemed to dissolve entirely. We weren't a geographer and an artist, we were just two people standing under an old tree, finally saying the things we should have said when the bark was still smooth. "I'm scared, Barnaby," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "What if London changes us? What if the distance is too much, even with the Volvo?" I took her hands in mine. They were cold, but they felt like home. "Then we'll draw a new map. We'll mark the halfway points. We'll find the service stations with the best coffee. We'll make the M4 our own personal highway of destiny. And if we get lost, we'll just look for the North Star. Or the nearest hula hoop." She smiled, a tear escaping and trailing a path down her cheek. "You really are a ridiculous man." "I'm your ridiculous man," I corrected. "And I have a very reliable car." We stayed under the tree for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen across the grass. It felt like a closing ceremony for our childhood, a final goodbye to the B+E who had been frozen in time for 10 years. As we walked back towards the town, I realized that I wasn't worried about the future anymore. The boundaries weren't fixed. The maps weren't permanent. Life was a constant process of surveying and resurveying, of finding new landmarks and letting go of old ones. I was ready for London. I was ready for the jazz and the squirrels and the 3 in the morning neighbors. Because as long as I had Elara, I knew exactly where I was. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. We reached her aunt's gate again. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the cottage. "Friday morning?" she asked, her hand on the latch. 10 a.m. sharp, I promised. "I'll bring the snacks. And maybe a compass, just for old time's sake." "I'll bring the light," she said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. As she walked up the path, I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool evening air. I felt like a man who had finally found the X on a very long, very complicated treasure map. And the best part was, the treasure wasn't gold or jewels. It was a journey that was only just beginning. I turned and headed back towards my own house, my steps light on the pavement. I had a lot to do. I needed to pack. I needed to check the oil in the Volvo. And I needed to find a very good map of Hackney. Because even a geographer needs a little help finding his way in a new world. Especially when that world is full of art, love, and the occasional aggressive squirrel. The night felt full of promise, a vast, unmapped territory waiting to be explored. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was looking forward to it. 1 mile, 1 coordinate, and 1 hula hoop at a time. Packing a life into cardboard boxes is, I've decided, an exercise in brutal honesty. You realize quite quickly that you are not the sophisticated intellectual you pretend to be at dinner parties. You are, in fact, a hoarder of useless sentimental rubbish. I spent 3 hours staring at a chipped ceramic mug I'd won at a village fete in 2014. It had a picture of a very depressed-looking hedgehog on it. Why was I keeping it? Because it represented a specific Tuesday when the rain smelled like wet wool and I'd felt inexplicably triumphant. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by rolls of brown packing tape that seemed to have a personal vendetta against my thumb. A box, I told the hedgehog mug, is a temporary container for the soul's clutter. We are all just moving our clutter from one coordinate to another, hoping the new sunlight makes it look like art instead of junk. It felt like a profound observation, the sort of thing a man with a beard and a turtleneck might say in a French film, but then I accidentally taped my own sock to the floor and the illusion of wisdom vanished. The Volvo sat in the driveway, looking stout and dependable, like a metallic golden retriever waiting for a walk. I had spent the morning checking the fluids with the intensity of a NASA engineer preparing for a lunar landing. Oil, golden, coolant, sufficiently blue, tires, plump with the air of the countryside, soon to be replaced by the more cynical, suit-heavy air of the capital. Elara arrived at 9:54 a.m. She was always early in a way that suggested she lived in a slightly faster time zone than the rest of humanity. She was wearing a pair of dungarees covered in dried teal paint and a beret that sat so precariously on her head I suspected it was held there by sheer force of will. "Are we ready for the Great Migration?" she asked, leaning against the gate. She was holding a tray of takeaway coffees and a bag of pastries that smelled so good I felt my knees weaken. "The Volvo is primed," I said, rising from the floor with a series of alarming cracks from my joints. "I have packed the essentials. Maps, compass, 3 different types of emergency biscuits, and a very small cactus I've named Sir Reginald." Elara peered into the back of the car. "Barnaby, you've packed your books in alphabetical order by the author's second cousin's maiden name again, haven't you? It's a logical system, Elara. It prevents intellectual stagnation." She laughed, that bright, bell-like sound that made the grey morning feel like a midsummer afternoon. "You're a disaster. Let's go. London won't know what hit it. Or, more likely, it won't notice us at all, which is half the fun." We pulled out of the driveway, the car sagging slightly under the weight of Elara's canvases and my collection of vintage surveying equipment. As the familiar hedgerows of our youth began to recede in the rearview mirror, a strange silence settled over us. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, it was the heavy, pregnant silence of a book's final page being turned before the sequel begins. "Do you think the B+E tree will miss us?" she asked suddenly, her eyes fixed on the passing fields. "Trees have a different sense of time," I replied, channeling my inner, slightly unhinged philosopher. To a tree, we were just a brief, itchy sensation on its skin. A 10-year blink. It'll probably enjoy the peace and quiet. No more clumsy teenagers with pocket knives trying to calculate the geometry of love. "I like that," she whispered. "We were just a blink." The M4 motorway is a strange place. It is a river of tarmac that connects the quiet, mossy dreams of the West Country to the frantic, caffeinated reality of London. Driving it felt like a transformation. With every mile marker, I felt the small-town Barnaby shedding his skin. The man who knew exactly which floorboard creaked in the local library was being replaced by a man who was about to get very lost looking for a specific artisan bakery in Dalston. "Look." Elara pointed at a sign. "Reading. We're halfway." "Halfway to the future," I said grandly. I tried to sound like a pioneer, but at that exact moment, I hit a small bump and Sir Reginald the cactus tipped over onto my lap. Golly, the future is quite prickly. Elara spent the next 20 minutes picking cactus spines out of my trousers with a pair of tweezers she kept in her handbag for artistic emergencies. It was a moment of profound intimacy, punctuated by my occasional yelps of pain and her rhythmic giggling. "This is the reality of our romance, Barnaby," she said, carefully extracting a needle from my thigh. "It's not grand gestures and moonlit balconies. It's tweezers and succulents on the hard shoulder of the M4. I wouldn't have it any other way," I wheezed. "It builds character. And calluses." As we approached the outskirts of London, the horizon began to change. The soft, rolling greens were replaced by the jagged, grey teeth of high-rises. The sky seemed smaller here, squeezed between glass and steel. I felt a flutter of genuine terror in my chest. What if I couldn't find my bearings? What if the geography of this place was too complex for my simple, rural heart? "Deep breaths," Elara said, sensing my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "The city is just a bigger map, Barnaby. More lines, more colors, but the principles are the same. You find your north, and you follow it." "My north is currently wearing dungarees and smells like cinnamon buns," I admitted. She smiled and squeezed my hand. "Then you're perfectly on course." Navigating Hackney in a Volvo laden with a decade of memories is like trying to play Tetris with a grand piano. The streets were narrow, lined with colorful graffiti and even more colorful people. There were cyclists who seemed to possess a death wish, and delivery drivers who regarded traffic lights as mere suggestions. We finally found the flat, a small, slightly crooked Victorian conversion with a door painted the color of a bruised plum. It was perfect. It looked like the kind of place where poems were written and tea was drunk in mismatched mugs. "We're here," I said, switching off the engine. The silence that followed was different from the one in the driveway. This was a loud silence, vibrating with the hum of the city around us. "We're here," Elara echoed. She looked at the building, then at me. "We actually did it. We escaped the gravity of our hometown." "Gravity is overrated," I said, feeling a sudden surge of that naive, bright optimism. "I think I prefer weightlessness." We spent the afternoon hauling boxes up 3 flights of stairs. I discovered that I am not built for manual labor. My muscles, which are primarily designed for holding pens and pointing at maps, began to protest by the second box of books. "You're making a very dramatic face, Barnaby," Elara noted as I struggled with a crate of miscellaneous kitchenware. "I am communing with the struggle of the common man," I panted. "Also, I think this box contains lead weights. Why do we own so many heavy things?" "Because we're afraid of floating away," she said, leaning against the doorframe, a streak of dust across her forehead. "But look at the light, Barnaby. Look at the way it hits that brick wall across the street." I looked. The setting sun was painting the London brick in shades of honey and rose. Somewhere nearby, a saxophone was being played badly, but with great enthusiasm. A squirrel, indeed looking quite aggressive, sat on a windowsill and stared at us with judgmental black eyes. "It's not the woods," I said softly. "No," she agreed, stepping into the empty living room and spinning in a slow circle. "It's a new map. And I can't wait to see where the X is." I walked over to her, ignoring the ache in my back and the lingering sting of the cactus spines. I took her hands, and for a moment, the bustling, noisy world of Hackney faded away. "I have a confession," I said. She tilted her head. "Another one? Are you secretly a spy? Or do you have another car hidden somewhere?" "No," I laughed. "It's just. I realized that I didn't just want to move to London. I wanted to move to wherever you were. If you decided to live in a lighthouse in the Hebrides or a yurt in Mongolia, I'd be checking the oil in the Volvo for a very different journey." Elara reached up and tucked a stray hair behind my ear. "Barnaby, you are the most ridiculous, sweet, geograph-obsessed man I have ever known. And I think I've been waiting for you to say that since we were 17. "Well," I said, pulling her closer. "I'm a geographer. I'm slow, but I eventually get to the right destination." We stood there in our new, empty home, as the shadows lengthened and the city lights began to twinkle like fallen stars. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The B+E on the tree was a beautiful relic, a fossil of a younger love. But this was living. This was the messy, wonderful, unmapped reality of two people choosing to walk the same path, 1 mile at a time. Tomorrow, I said, we buy a kettle. And a rug, she added. And maybe some squirrel-proof birdseed, I suggested, eyeing the intruder on the windowsill. She kissed me then, a soft, lingering kiss that tasted of coffee and new beginnings. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, the hardest part was just beginning. There would be bills to pay, and tube strikes to navigate, and the inevitable moment when we realized we'd forgotten to pack the tin opener. But as I looked at Elara, silhouetted against the golden London dusk, I knew I had everything I needed to find my way. I had my compass. I had my snacks. And I had the girl who had always been my true north. The Volvo was empty, the boxes were stacked, and the map was wide open. "Welcome home, Barnaby," she whispered. "Welcome home, Elara," I replied. The aggressive squirrel chattered once, seemingly in agreement, and leaped into the night. We were ready for whatever came next. One coordinate at a time. The Hackney sunset was not like the sunsets in our village. Back home, the sun dipped behind the ancient oaks with a certain quiet dignity, like a tired old king retiring for the night. Here, it went down in a blaze of defiance, fighting its way through a forest of chimney pots and satellite dishes, turning the smog into a shimmering veil of violet and gold. It was messy. It was loud. It was perfect. I stood in the center of our new living room, which was currently less of a room and more of a cardboard obstacle course. My back was screaming at me. I am fairly certain that my spine had decided to resign from its duties somewhere around the second floor, leaving my determination to do all the heavy lifting. I looked at my hands, which were grey with dust and smelling faintly of old tape. "Barnaby," Elara said, her voice echoing in the empty space. She was sitting on a crate of my old National Geographic magazines, swinging her legs. "You've been staring at that wall for 5 minutes. Are you calculating the structural integrity of the plaster, or have you just stopped working?" "I'm philosophizing, Elara," I said, trying to sound profound while subtly trying to pop my lower vertebrae back into place. I was thinking about the nature of space. Not outer space, obviously, though I do have thoughts on the loneliness of Pluto, but this space. This specific rectangle of London. 10 minutes ago, it was a flat. Now, because your easel is in that corner and my box of mismatched socks is in this one, it's becoming a here. Elara hopped off the crate and walked over to me. She smelled of the lavender soap she always used and the sharp, metallic tang of the city air. A here is a good start. But I think it needs more than socks to be a home. It needs us to stop being so terrified of it. "I'm not terrified," I lied, my voice cracking slightly as the aggressive squirrel on the windowsill let out a sharp, chattering bark. "I'm just cautiously observant. It's a very loud city, isn't it? Even the squirrels sound like they're trying to sell you a stolen watch." She laughed, a bright, silvery sound that cut through the low thrum of the traffic outside. "It's just life, Barnaby. It's just everyone else trying to find their here too." I looked down at her. The light was fading now, the shadows stretching long and thin across the bare floorboards. This was the girl who had shared my crisps in Year 7. The girl who had watched me fail my driving test 3 times before I finally mastered the art of the 3-point turn. The girl who had been the unspoken constant in every map I'd ever drawn. 4 years, I had treated my feelings for her like a rare, fragile specimen, something to be kept under glass, looked at but never touched, for fear of breaking the delicate balance of our friendship. But standing in this dusty, half-lit room, with the weight of the Volvo's journey still in my bones, I realized that silence is a very heavy thing to carry. It's heavier than a crate of books. It's heavier than a vintage tea set. I meant what I said, I whispered, the words feeling strange and new in the London air. "About the lighthouse. And the yurt. I think I've spent my whole life looking at maps because I was trying to find a way to tell you that I didn't want to go anywhere without you. I thought if I understood the world, I'd understand why my heart did that weird little skip-hop thing every time you walked into a room. Elara stepped closer, her hand finding mine. Her palm was warm, a solid anchor in the swirling uncertainty of our new life. You always did overcomplicate things, Barnaby. You don't need a compass to find something that's right in front of you. I know, I said, feeling a surge of that silly, breathless joy. But you have to admit, the compass looked very professional. It gave me an air of mystery. It gave you an air of someone who was perpetually lost, she teased, but her eyes were soft. But I didn't mind. I quite liked being lost with you. It meant we got to stay in the car longer. The confession hung between us, no longer a debt, but a gift. Youth is a strange creditor. It demands so much of our courage and gives us so little experience in return. We spend so much time waiting for the right moment, the perfect alignment of stars, not realizing that the stars are always moving and the moment is whatever we make of it. I had spent years owing her these words, and now that they were paid, I felt lighter than I ever had in the woods of our childhood. So, she said, her thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. What's the first thing we do in our new, unmapped reality? I looked around the room. The shadows were deep now, the city lights outside casting flickering patterns of neon blue and amber across the ceiling. It was a blank page. A fresh coordinate. Well, I said, my mind already drifting toward the practicalities of our new existence. Statistically speaking, the most important element of any successful settlement is the establishment of a reliable heat source and a supply of caffeine. So, as I mentioned, a kettle. A very good one. One that whistles, perhaps, to compete with the squirrels. A whistling kettle, Elara agreed, nodding solemnly. And we need to find a place for the maps. Not the ones of the world, Barnaby. I want a map of this borough. I want us to mark every chip shop we visit, every park where we sit, every street where we get lost. A map of us, I said. I like that. It's very geologically significant. You're a dork, she whispered, leaning her head against my shoulder. I'm your dork, I corrected. And I have a very important question. Yes. Do you think the Volvo will be okay parked on the street? I feel like she's used to more greenery. She might feel intimidated by the double-decker buses. They're very large, Elara. Like mechanical whales. She giggled, the sound muffled against my jumper. The Volvo will be fine. She's a survivor. She got us here, didn't she? Through the rain and the narrow lanes and your questionable playlist of 1980s synthpop. Hey, Dipch mode is essential travel music, I protested. We stood there for a long time, just breathing in the scent of the new and the old. Outside, the city roared on, a million stories intersecting, a million people looking for their own X on the map. But in here, in this small, dusty square of Hackney, the world was perfectly still. I thought about the tree back home, with our initials carved into its skin. It was still there, growing slowly, the B+E stretching and changing as the years went by. It was a record of who we were. But this flat, with its bare walls and its noisy neighbors and its lack of a kettle, was a record of who we were becoming. I'm happy, Barnaby, Elara said softly. Me too, I replied. And I don't even have my snacks yet. We'll get snacks tomorrow. Tonight. Tonight we just stay here. As the moon rose over the city, silvering the edges of the skyscrapers and casting a gentle glow over the boxes of our lives, I realized that geography isn't about distances at all. It's not about how many miles you travel or how many borders you cross. It's about the person who sits in the passenger seat. It's about the person who helps you carry the heavy boxes of your past into the empty rooms of your future. I reached out and flicked the light switch. The room was bathed in a warm, amber glow. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Right, I said, clapping my hands together with a sudden burst of energy. I believe I saw a packet of chocolate digestives in the miscellaneous kitchenware box. If we can find them, we can have a celebratory floor picnic. Elara's eyes lit up. Barnaby, you are a genius. A map-reading, biscuit-finding genius. I have my moments, I said, already diving into the box. We spent the rest of the night sitting on the floor, eating slightly squashed biscuits and planning a world that didn't need to be perfect to be beautiful. We talked about where the sofa should go, and whether we should get a plant, a non-stinging one, I insisted, and how many years it would take us to truly know the secrets of the streets outside. The journey had been long. It had been filled with wrong turns, missed opportunities, and a lot of tea. But as I looked at Elara, laughing with a biscuit crumb on her chin, I knew I had finally found the right destination. The Volvo sat quietly on the street below, its engine cooling, its work done. The map was folded away. The confession was spoken. And the X was right here, exactly where it was always meant to be. 1 mile at a time. 1 biscuit at a time. 1 heartbeat at a time. We were home.